So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second Berges lecture for 2013. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Hackett to you. You can see the title of his talk behind me. James P. Hackett is Chief Executive Officer and Director of Steelcase Inc., a global leader office furniture industry. It's a well-known major corporation located not that far away from South Bend, Indiana. Has a network of 670 dealers. It's industry-leading and publicly traded company with fiscal 2013 revenues of $2.9 billion. Jim was named CEO of Steelcase in December of 1994, so he has a 20-year track record. He held a number of other positions in Steelcase and Steelcase's subsidiaries, including Steelcase Ventures, Turnstone. In 1990, he was named Steelcase Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing. And prior to that, he held management positions at Procter & Gamble, and he was telling us at dinner, worked with people like Jim Ballmer and Meg Whitman, which I shouldn't have to introduce in front of a business audience. He's on the board of directors of Northwestern Mutual and Fifth Third Bank Corporation. He's on the board of advisors to the Gerald Ford School of Public Policy and the Life Sciences Institute at the University of Michigan. He has his bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, and he even played football there under Bo Schembechler, the legendary coach, and he told us at dinner he played against Joe Montana in a JV game at Notre Dame Stadium where there was like no one in the crowd, so a little different than 115,000, right, Jim? But please be gracious losers with me tonight and give him a special Notre Dame welcome to Jim Hackett.
Thank you, and what an honor it is to be here. Professor Murphy's mission in teaching about business and ethics is like a noble calling. And when I got the invitation to come, I didn't know, where the idea of me being attractive to you tonight came from, but I just wanted to be here. This is the kind of respect I have for the place. And what I want to do is, I'm going to watch my clock here, and I hope you can stay, is I want to talk for maybe 20 minutes about this thesis I have about competing, but I really want to have a dialogue with you. So I don't know what the culture is in terms of having a back and forth with your speakers, but I'd love to talk to you about business and ethics. So this concept of competing is, if we go to the next slide, is in the minds of everyone as we hammered each other on Saturday night, And my father, as you'll hear in my story, was an All-American at Ohio State. So if you think that that Notre Dame and Michigan can have some wrinkles every now and then, you ought to grow up in a house where there's Michigan-Ohio State division. And he was an All-American in the 40s and captain of the team, and I was the youngest of 4 kids. And he used to say, Paul Brown was his coach, and Paul Brown used to say, when you win, say little, and when you lose, say less. So that's my thinking tonight, is that I really am not here to talk about football. And I'm very proud of the game that was played by both sides Saturday night. It was a fun game to see. But I'm here to talk about me and the fact that I was destined to compete a long time ago. I grew up Irish Catholic in a Midwestern town, some of you that have that pedigree like I have, with 3 older brothers. And I was parented by, you heard about my father, the football player, but he was a veterinarian as well. And my mother was such a spirited lady. I think that she was this teeny little thing, and she had 5 of us all play college football. And she really kind of ruled the roost. My dad used to kind of laugh at the fact that there were 4 of us. It was always 2-on-2 everything. And what he loved is, of course, when that would spill over into a fight. And my mom would kind of cry and say, Bill, you're letting them, they're going to kill each other. But of course, he thought his Irish Catholic heritage, that was the way you kind of learned the way of the world. Our home was in a Midwestern town. in center of Ohio. And even though it had a rural feel, we had enough neighbors around that we could round out the sandlot games by the neighbors joining in, because there were 4 of us. Now, we would often ask them to join, to which they would say, you know, Hackett, every time we play, you brothers get in a fight with each other. And we would promise that wouldn't happen, and it would always end up that way. Except when one of them picked on one of us, and then we had each other's back, you know, which was kind of a nice thing to report to you. In fact, just a few years ago, my oldest son, got married. Of course, all my brothers were there at the wedding. We didn't get in a fight, but one of my brothers was my management team was there from Steelcase. These are people that I was showing off, you know, my heritage to. And one of my older brothers said that Jim was the sister that they never had. So I thought, you know, I would have normally hauled off and belted him with that, but it wouldn't have set the right signal, because in business you can't hit the other side. You know, I just want you to know that if you haven't heard that. So on one hand, this is tongue-in-cheek as I get started with you, but it's fun to reflect back on when I talk to you about competition and have you maybe think about, where is the spirit for you come from to compete in business? Because as you go into business, that's what it's about. You're going to be competing. You heard that I had a heritage here playing football at Michigan. I wasn't very good. I want to point that out. And I had a lot of friends that played here at Notre Dame. But competing in athletics, for those of us in the room that have done that, it did set a stage for what we call a script in psychology. That this idea that I would train every season and I would get in shape and I would try and perform. I talked about my father, who had all this success at Ohio State, but his biggest dream was that we would go to college, because he grew up in a family of 11, very poor. They had to split the family up during the Depression, and he just thought that education was his ticket out. He used to say, only in America could someone like him come from a family of 11 with nothing and end up with a veterinarian degree from Ohio State. So that stuck with me, and in one way, that's why I'm honored to be in front of you. I want you to know it matters to me that you go to college and that you're trying to better yourself. It should help your confidence a great deal. It sure helped me. But there's a technique I'd like to go through tonight to get you to change the context of the way you think about competition, how you see yourself in the context of business. I mean, we don't tend to think, when you're sitting here right now, you don't tend to think, am I breathing or not? You know, the auto control system in our body is taking care of that. We just don't think about which foot to put in front of the other when we're walking. It just kind of happens. Well, competition can be like this. I'm trying to change in business in Steelcase that you actually do think about it. We compete really because we're not aware of why or whether, we just do it. And tonight I want to introduce this next idea, which is the physics of business. That in my time, and someone corrected me when I was writing this and getting help, they said physics is about energy and matter. Why you can't use it in business? Well, I can, because I'm writing the speech, but secondly, I think that physics in these terms means to me the general analysis of nature conducted in order to understand how things behave. So when you go to school here, you're learning topical areas in a rich, deep way. And what I can tell you after running a company for 20 years is I still learn in a deeper way. And I'm going to suggest to you tonight, if we flip the slide, Joel, is that there's a systems view of the way the things in businesses interact. So let's say for a moment that you weren't from this planet. And you arrived here because your mission was told to compete in business. But as an alien, you had to learn about the underlying nature of the topic. In other words, you weren't allowed to go to business to find out what it meant. You had to find a proxy for what it meant to compete. So someone sent you down to earth to stare and study at other systems in competition. And for you to come back and report what happens in that system that is exemplary of competition. to better explain the way business might operate. Where would you go to find that answer? What thinkers or systems would you study? Can't study business, you have to study something else. Well, we've said sports is one, but we don't want to go into that tonight. And I want us to think about higher table stakes. Notre Dame and Michigan are going to be fined after Saturday night. They're extraordinary programs. I was saying to somebody, in fact, because you all were coming home, or you aren't part of that network, they interviewed the Michigan coach in the locker room, and the guy says, "Why weren't you able to stop the Notre Dame run?" And he said, "Jim, they have a fantastic program." That was his answer. That's what you get when you play Notre Dame. But the table stakes here aren't that they're not going to die if they lose. I want you to think about, if you don't win, you die. You don't survive. So one thing you could look at is you could look at nature. Now Darwin, some of you are scientists in the room. Darwin's over 150 years old. I started reading a lot about him. Not in the vein of the controversy between the different theories of evolution. I'm not here to argue that problem. I was really trying to understand why a man 150 years ago, without computing, could discover something that was so fundamental. And the way he did it is he studied species that had enough generations in his lifetime, flies and flowers and so on and so forth, that he could see as they changed generations, they were changing. It's as though nature had a practice field so that it could get better, because he could study the way species were changing themselves. Well, that would help you with your underlying question as the alien to come back and say, well, if business behaved like nature, what is it doing as it goes through multiple generations? There's another place you could go, which is the Santa Fe Institute. By show of hands, anyone know of this thing? Well, I'd ask you to Google it. There's a lot of things in here you might be interested in. This is a more modern view of what Darwin studied. It really comes about because after World War II, most of its occupants were the bomb designers. And these were theoretical physicists, mathematicians, and they got really bummed out about the destructiveness of the bomb. There's a lot of stories now written, more recently, in the last 10 years, about their lives. And I read every book I could on every physicist that worked on the atom bomb project, because I was in search of how were they able to crack the code on this problem when others couldn't? Why were they more competitive? Well, when they decided they didn't want to work on weapons anymore, they said, we got to work on a really meaty topic, because we love Santa Fe, New Mexico. They stayed there because they loved the weather. So they picked complex systems theory, which is basically, if we turn the page, what's called complexity science. And if you look on the slide there, I'll read what it says. It says, the study of the phenomena which emerge from a collection of interacting objects. In other words, complexity science is that. Random things that collide that cause something to happen. Emergence is the way that complex systems kind of express themselves. Things come out of these interactions. Because the variables were created together, it creates catalytic moments which alter outcomes in a way that wouldn't be the same as though it were planned. So when you say in a casual way, that's a complex problem, you really mean it's difficult. If you're in this group and you say it's complex, you actually mean there's a core rule to the way it behaves. And I'm going to talk to you about why that matters in business. So the notion of emergence out of complexity becomes a powerful clarifier of what wins over time. So let's do an example. I read a study about a group of Stanford researchers from different disciplines who were actually independently studying the ecosystem of a remote island. I made up a name here. At the core was whether the fishermen, who, and this is true, who made their livelihood off the fish that were off the coast, and in fact it had waned, why was the fishing really going the other way? Now these groups at Stanford that were studying this island had not talked about doing this together, and it was by chance. In fact, I make up this part. Imagine they're on this island, they decide to have a beer together. What are you working on? What are you working on? And they find out something really interesting. They find out that there's not secular research here, there's something that's connected. For example, one group was studying the nature of trees that populate the island. They just wanted to know why these trees made it there. A second Stanford group was studying the type of marine life that was near the coast that the fishermen were after. And a third group was actually studying the species of birds that were on the island. They were all independently searching for different things. And I'm paraphrasing the deep science here, but they discovered something really interesting. That if you change the trees on the island, which had happened, you found that new trees attracted a different species of bird. This meant that the new type of bird droppings were ending up in the coastal waters that the earlier fish didn't like. I know that's not appetizing. Which changed the marine life population off the coast. The fishing waned because the trees changed. That's what complexity science is about. So in a parallel way, the system altered itself in some sort of more fit way. Could nature be scripting what kind of trees it wanted to have on its island so it could attract the birds it knew that would roost there, so it could feed the fish it wanted, so that the humans could feed from its shallow waters? Can a system really communicate that way? To what end and why would this happen? It turns out in deconstructing nature like I just did, that part of it was random. For whatever reason the trees changed, it changed the rest of the cycle. And that these variables then collided, fish, droppings, fishermen, and an emergent behavior emerged. That's the part that I want to change in your mind about competition, is that these random variables in business interact. So I know you're wondering at this point, I've got 10 more minutes, we could understand if this guy wanted to talk to us here at Notre Dame about how sport and competing in business are linked, especially since he's an ex-jock and played football. But he's going on about how bird crap is changing the competitive landscape. Maybe he took too many hits to the head. I apologize for that abstraction. But this comes from 20 years of running Steelcase and facing this question. Growing up Irish Catholic, my Catholicism was really important to me. And I had an employee group of 30,000 people that was on its way to 15. And I remember telling my mom when she was alive, I said, Mom, I would love to retire as a CEO and never have to lay off one worker, particularly in America for a job that was going to Mexico or China. But on the way to this abstraction that I'm telling you about, I was in Stanford thinking about this problem. And I read a book called Genius. It's the story of one of these bomb designers, Richard Feynman. And in it, I started to understand that underneath my spiritual beliefs was a system interacting for fitness. Fitness in this term does not mean our ability to run a mile or lift weights. It means to compete to win. And the Steelcase system had become unfit over time by doing nothing wrong. It's because of all the variables changed. So I'll give you an example that's not Steelcase. As a system evolves, it creates a notion called a dominant design. Let's take a business example here. You see, if I said to you, imagine this group of players in the mail delivery business. The one on the lower left is the Pony Express. It was overtaken by the railroad, which was overtaken by the U.S. Postal System, which was overtaken by Federal Express, which is being overtaken by Gmail or email. Well, what the complexity science will tell you, and this is probably the punchline tonight, this is really hard to imagine, that each system had a dominant design when it was winning. In the case of the Pony Express, what's the dominant feature of that? What made it work? The horse, yeah, the ponies. So guess what? When the new system emerges, they won't give up the pony. In other words, this science has been proven that the virtues of what made one system great blind it to changing what it needs to have to compete. In fact, the perversity is they choose to die rather than to change. That's hard to say to you. The day I got that book on Genius, I thought, I don't want Steelcase to die. I don't want these people to be hurt, but we're not fit. So the system in this story here, each one of these are so successful at their peak, it's hard to question any aspect of its dominance. And that's what we had to do. So it's hard to imagine. If we look at this challenge then, that there's a new, imagine you're in charge of Federal Express. And you've just heard Jim Hackett lecture, and you've told your board that the thing that made us great, we're not willing to give up. Well, that means that your new state, I call that state B, is against your old state, state A. And they're kind of like two crusts in the earth, like an earthquake is going to happen. But picture this. The most profitable year at IBM in its history was when the PC was coming out, because they were mainly a mainframe company. The most profitable year at Microsoft, most recently, is when the tablet and app software is coming out. The most profitable year of BMW, they sold more luxury cars than anybody in the US, was when they hit a peak with metal and gas cars, when all of their new investment is going after Tesla, carbon fiber, and electric. Or the most profitable year at Steelcase, Mike's here, was when people moving from cubicle concentrations to meeting rooms for team-based work. The competitive showdowns, I call them, happen in every business. It's a juxtaposition of the legacy business against the emergent state. If you followed my quick lecture on complexity science, you're never able to avoid that. It's at this junction that the choice to survive plays out. The dominance of the design that is winning causes answers that would seem silly at that time. You know, when they asked Henry Ford, I started on Ford's board on Thursday this week, so I've been reading everything I can about Henry Ford. Henry Ford was asked, what do people want? You know the answer to that? They wanted a faster horse. That's what a dominant design does to the way you think about. So quickly now, Steelcase, in changing its thing, began to use a concept called design thinking. This is something I would love to leave you in addition to understanding that businesses choose to not change and die, and that design thinking is in modern times a new technique for deconstructing what the new ideas are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. You can read about the history of Steelcase, so I won't bore you with it. But the insight I can give you tonight is that we had been number one for a long time, since the 1960s. Over 4 decades. That's unusual. We're a 100-year-old company. And our dominance was both, as you heard me say, a curse and a blessing. At the time I took over, I actually replaced a family member. We were private for 86 years. And they recruited an outsider to come in and run the company. This guy was really talented, a solid business person, and he was fired because he questioned the dominant design of the factory system that had made us great, our distribution model, one of our dealers is here, and our lack of expansion in Asia. Our board didn't want to hear that because they said to him, we're fine. Just do more of what we've done to be great. It all seems simple to me today, but back then it wasn't obvious to anybody. Steelcase was choosing to die rather than to change. So one of the things that you see in this picture, the next one, is that I was running a startup for the company, and I don't have time tonight to talk to you about it, but it was a new emergent model idea. It was before, I know I'm this old, before .com was around. I was inventing, though, the first .com company in our industry. Because we built it on a catalog model, it was easy to make it a .com idea. I'd been with the company 14 years, and I opted out of the mainstream business. And I went over and worked on starting Turnstone. I'd become so frustrated with the fact that we weren't growing and we weren't changing. And I really didn't want to leave the company, but I wanted to quit that system. And I loved what I was doing there. At that time, I had interactions with a really famous guy. He's in this picture, David Kelly. Anyone in the room know what IDEO or David Kelly? Did you ever seen the shopping cart video in college? Anyone? Well, if you have a chance and you Google 60 Minutes in January, David was on with Charlie Rose. This is a shot from David's explaining what IDEO was about. Steelcase bought IDEO. Steve Jobs was David's best man. So right when I became CEO at 39, Steve wasn't at Apple, but David was acquired by me, by Steelcase, and he changed my life. Because what he was doing with Steve at Apple and what he was doing with Jim at Steelcase was helping us understand a concept of user-centered design. I thought that IDEO could help us rethink the dominant design of the office around technology versus furniture. But sitting here tonight, it did much more. The concept of design thinking, which we now know, is the pixie dust inside Apple. If you said, give us a different word for design thinking, it's the ability to deconstruct human use and repackage it in ways that make it delightful. So we had to do that. It's funny tonight that I'm sitting in a business school because when I first became CEO, we did it's called ethnographic research, which means you're just studying humans. Anthropologists know this, usually with film or pictures. These are pictures, actual pictures from Carnegie Mellon's room like this. And I sent teams of people in there. You got to remember, this is in 1996. So the personal computer is a little more than a decade old. The internet's only 5 years old at that time. And we noticed when we gave the students laptops, what happened is, first of all, in the top left, that's what Professor Murphy would see. Because they never imagined the laptop in the classroom. The top right was the students going between classes. They didn't close the laptop. Why didn't they do that? Take way too long to boot up. This is 96, we solved that problem. Guess what boots up really fast today? A tablet. On the left, we found when we did studies of you coming into this room, everybody sat in one seat in each row straight up the stairs. Why was that? That was the power outlet. Why was there only one power outlet per row? What was it there for?
Projectors or something like that.
The sweeper. We got to sweep each row. We need a plug in each row. This is an example of the dominant design driving the way you use things. So what Kelly pioneered at IDEO was the way to deconstruct this. And I can tell you 50 product ideas came out here. The one that didn't was I didn't keep my $7 Apple stock. I sold it at 38. I mean, we knew that Instant On was going to become a really important product, but I was busy working on furniture. So we changed Steelcase, and on the right is an example. If you were, I think we have these at Notre Dame. It's called Mediascape. That came from watching students in the hallway huddle over each other's laptops to have a discussion about what you were going to discuss in class or casework or whatever. We said, why can't we create a device that lets you network to each other? We call that Mediascape. So we have a book of 75-year-old pictures and a book of more modern pictures that I don't have time tonight to take you through. This was a big thing that we, like the slide at Carnegie Mellon, we invented a concept called I and we. I'll start there, which is think about this is called a we setting. Whenever you work with other people, we call that we, and when you work by yourself, we call that I. And we said, how good are those two settings for our customers? And they weren't very good. And then we added this other layer over time, which is fixed and mobile. You didn't grow up when there was only wired computing, but those people in that classroom were the first to have wireless environments. If you think that wireless will be dominant in the future, then you didn't hear the first part of my speech. It will as long as it's the most fit. Right now, from Wendell Weeks, who invented Gorilla Glass for Apple, has showed me an idea. If you take a fiber optic, it's the thinness of a human hair. If you coil that, then this length can become that length. So if you think about bits going across that length or this length, you've just doubled the capacity just by coiling the fiber optic. So they are doing that. So what's happening is that the nature of video and the kinds of things you want over the web, we're going to have this constant battle always between wired and wireless. But the thing that's changing our world the most is mobility, the fact that you can work anywhere. You don't have to be here. And we're working on the design of that. So let me end with this slide, and then we'll talk about something that's really important to me is ethics. This is a slide you get to use the rest of your life, and it's a gift that was given to me by the chairman of Motorola, which is the top curve. The graph is the quality on one axis and over time. The top curve is the ability to make things over time gets better. So the camera that's filming me tonight is smaller than the one that I had when I first had my kids. The airplane that I came in to see you tonight has more safety measures in it than the one I started when I was CEO. The car that you're in, driving because I'm on Ford, is going to brake for you. It's going to keep you from getting in accidents. It is made better. 250,000 miles is what they design a Ford to last. That wasn't the case in 1910. But the bottom curve is a descending curve. We get worse at this. It's the ability to understand use. So this is how can flying be so much safer and it sucks so bad, commercially. It's because the design, the dominant design, didn't get altered for use. It's great that it got altered for safety and fuel efficiency, but the new Boeing 787 is an example of what they're trying to change. So if you fly on a Boeing 787, the pressure's not as great, your face doesn't dry out, the windows are bigger so you can see, the lighting's LED, the seats have Steelcase technology in them so your back doesn't get tired. I can go on and on about why did it take so long? My friend Bill McDonough says it took 100 years for them to figure out to put wheels on our suitcases. And that's an example of use. So competing in the future is, in summary, this, is the ability for you to see the business that you're in terms of how fit it is. The second thing is for you to understand that it's likely that its virtues that are making it great are being attacked by a new system. Clayton Christensen writes this in The Innovator's Dilemma, but it's the same argument. That third, that people tend to believe that the virtues can't be given up. So what made them great will keep them great. That's flawed. And fourth is that the nature of fitness is it never stops. So as a CEO who's retiring now in March, I want to start over again. I want to go back and say, now that I understand how to run a business, give me a new one. But I need some time off because this job was so busy. Professor Murphy and I connected through a New York Times article I did about ethics. And Noel Tishy at Michigan has written extensively on ethics. I've been in some of his books if you want to see the story of that. And I want to start our dialogue about that. You can ask me anything you want about IDO, about designing products, about competing, but I'd like to start with ethics. And what I said in that article, that is the formation of the way I had to become CEO, is I said I have to practice for the moment when cheating would be easier than playing by the rules. Because I told myself, when that moment comes, the stress is going to be so high, I don't know if I trust myself. I don't know. I believe I'll have the fortitude. I think of my parents and all my upbringing, my eight grades of elementary Catholic education, which I wouldn't trade for anything. But the idea of competing, CEOs have rationalized all is fair in love and war and all these kinds of statements. It's not true. So what I want to challenge you about is how do you get yourself ready? What's the bedrock for how you think about what are the boundaries that you won't compromise? And if you go to work for a company where you go, well, I guess I didn't understand. I guess I was naive. This is what it takes. Don't buy that. At dinner, I was sharing names of people I know that run big companies, and we talk about this all the time. So they don't want that in their companies either. So let's take a few moments and have some questions. Please ask them, because I really love this part of our interaction. Yes?
I have a question that goes back to the staircase of starting with the Pony Express.
Yeah, let's go back to that one.
All the way to Gmail.
Yeah.
Just my quick background is that I worked Six Sigma at Dow Chemical, and I'm an MBA student in Professor Murphy's class. And you would start off, and you'd be at a Pony Express. And you'd say, let's put together a multi-generation plan. Where do we want to go? And what we would use is we'd say, we want to go to the moon in 20 years, so to speak. Right now, we don't even have rockets, so how do we get there? It seems like you're saying that it is better to evolve with your variables rather than set this landing on the moon goal. Am I understanding that? Are you saying it'd be better to understand your Pony Express business and quietly evolve rather than say, hey, let's go Gmail and find out how to get there?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. And I have two ways of thinking about that, and I'm going to get very direct with you about maybe what you're searching for. But what you made me think about is there was a movement, it's in Harvard Business articles, about BHAG, B-H-A-G, which stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals. And in my time of running Steelcase, it went in favor, and now I'm learning about human motivation and complexity science and learning that they're a huge mistake. The idea of going to the moon, I'm going to come back and explain how you can see that in an idea that I have. But BHAGs, the idea of putting a fantastic goal out there, what we learned from Josh Margulis at Harvard was that Enron, ask yourself this question. Do you think everyone at Enron was a crook that was in that executive suite? It's just the probability is not that they could be. But they become a crooked organization. So one thing that Josh found out at Harvard that caused it was this idea of setting goals. Now there's been supplemental research that say most people cheat if it's perceived that there's an unyielding performance in front, that they have to have it. That the idea of not succeeding is too distasteful, so most people will cheat to do that. So as a CEO, you think, well, if I'm causing that, how do I do that? Well, you can't go, Coach Kelly can't go and go, well, it'd be okay if we don't win. He's trying to demand the winning, but he's also trying to insist upon the way we'll win. At Steelcase, what I decided was that Bo had this great saying that you either get better or you get worse, you don't stay the same. I read later when these biographies, I think Einstein said that. But Bo used it in football, and I've used it in business. And so Enron could have, and Dow could have a goal that they have to be better, what I call at Steelcase being more fit. We define what more fit is. But we can't set a standard that causes you to think you don't know who you are. Because I'm relying that isn't in question every day. Now, to the point, you go, well, how do you do it? Well, this is another lecture. I'm writing this article for Harvard right now, which is I think about the business on 3 time phases, now, near, and far. And basically what we do is we look at the Pony Express today and we say, how fit is it? And there's indicators of that, market share, profitability, customer retention. You have a lot of diagnostics. In the near and far terms, and this is why I need another hour to explain to you, and this is what they did with the moon, we take what we call 3 radials that go across those time dimensions, and we say, if those persist, will they change business? One of them is Moore's Law. So we say, if your iPhone, what'd you pay for your iPhones? $300 roughly? So in 5 years, it costs $30. In 10 years, it's $3. In 5 years, it's 10 times more powerful. In 10 years, it's 100 times more powerful. I say my granddaughter, who will be 10, will get an iPhone 100 times more powerful than mine for the cost of an ice cream cone. So if you're deciding to run Dow or Steelcase or Ford and you say, well, that radio persists, so how are we going to be fit in a world where that kind of capability can be in the hands of others? A book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis talks about a Maasai warrior has more computing power in his hand than the President of the United States did, just a decade, 2 decades ago. So the difference in the two techniques is that you're trying to make your business compete competitive to win. You're not trying to guess what the fantasy world is. And Mediascape is a 10-year-old idea. It was invented in the years 2000. We just got knocked off by our competitors this year. It took them 10 years because we went out and asked about Moore's Law. Well, now that they've knocked off Mediascape, we're working on the next generation that we know they're not thinking about. And that's how we're competing to win.
Thank you.
Good question. Another one. Yes, sir.
With established companies like yours, would you say the easiest way to compete and have the newest, freshest, dominant design would be through acquisitions of companies that are working on it or developing it internally?
That's a great question. I should share with you, I do something that Jack Welch did at GE, and I'm doing this tomorrow with my team. I invite a CEO of another company in, famous CEOs, to talk about a topic that they've used as a weapon, to win. And this gentleman, Eric Fast, has run a company called Crane, and he's done billions of dollars of acquisitions, and he changed the company from like an old industrial company to a modern industrial company. And he used acquisitions. I have some ex-McKinsey guys on my team, and they say, 70% of acquisitions never return shareholder value. That's just the physics of it. So I decided to use the David Kelly, Steve Jobs approach. Steve made acquisitions. You just didn't hear about them. Liquid Metal that made your compact case is an acquisition he made. He bought the supplier so that no one else could take it. So acquisitions are strategic. But I actually turn that another way and say that your goal is to be ahead, not fast. So in my business school training, we had this notion of fast followers. I don't think that works in a world now that you go into. And you go, why? It's because I didn't go into this. The speed at which these systems evolve are faster than they used to be. And they're faster again as they will be. So it's kind of like your brain explodes and you think, what do you mean? How do we compete if it's faster? Well, you try and aim ahead where that system isn't competing yet, and you try to adopt an advantage that by the time the system gets there, you're already in that spot. Charlie Rose asked Reed Hastings, who founded Netflix, he said, does everyone in Palo Alto know something we don't know? And Reed said, they do. And Charlie said, what is that? He said, Moore's Law. Now, I'm in Grand Rapids. I know about Moore's Law. And Charlie said, I know about Moore's Law. He said, but Reed said, but we're designing for where it's going, not where it is. So Netflix, before they made this momentous decision to change the mail service to the video streaming, he saw a gigabyte to the house when he could look in his rearview mirror and say it was only 10 years ago that AOL had the scratchy sound when you locked up to the network. It was only 10 years ago that that happened. And we're going to be seeing a gigabyte to the home. So he needed to redesign his business model to be ahead when that hits. And at Steelcase, I make this point every day that you cannot say we just move faster. I was picking on another CEO tonight who is a relatively new CEO in a big, really big company. And this CEO, upon learning about a really bad quarter, wrote a note to their people and said, you're not working hard enough because they're falling behind in cloud computing. I used that with my team and said, you'll never hear that from me. What that letter should have said is we have to be ahead of where the market is now. And how are we going to get there? The notion of competing is the system's moving underneath us all the time. And we have to be ahead. Now, to spirit into that, what you're learning in this course is you cannot cheat. You know why? Because you risk the brand. If you aim for ahead and you don't make it, you can recover from that because you can do it again. But if you cheat, oh my goodness, you lose this. The trust comes from integrity. People will not work for something they can't trust or buy. And trust comes from integrity. So if you don't have integrity, you can't have trust, and therefore the algorithm doesn't work. You can't lead. You can't own the brand space. So this is why in the New York Times article I said, you can't toy with that. It's a zero-sum game. Or another maxim is, if you make a mistake, who in the room isn't human? If you make a mistake, don't double down. That's the problem. We'll all forgive Mr. Wiener if he just doesn't do it again. Or all these kinds of human failures that I and others have had. It's about learning from it and growing and saying, how do we have to be better? Plus, marry really well and you're going to have a great life, as I did, because I'm married to the same person for 37 years, and it's just amazing when I see my friends that have trouble in running companies how much the marriage is, a stable part of what I have to do. By the way, I can't curse on campus at Notre Dame, but she's the BS meter for me too, So if she were sitting here, she'd be going like that, when I've talked too much. And that's just a passing thing about the nature of the people you surround yourself with is a form of your ethics. So you get to choose, you have choice, which management team you want to be on, who you want to work for. I don't care if you're making $10 an hour or $1 million a year, you have choice. And you have boundaries. And you're at a place where the whole life here at Notre Dame was built successfully around the ability to see that you can take this and be a gift for life. We're in cultures all over the world. I spoke at Michigan's MBA program. One guy said to me, okay, if you have to smuggle water across a country line, border, that you have to pay off the guard so you can get water to people who aren't dying. He wants to paint the picture where it's okay. And I said to him, I understand that dilemma. In human nature, to save a life kind of supersedes the hierarchy in a lot of ways. But the danger is, the sin in this is rationalizing that because you were saving a life with water, you can now cheat on your expense report. Or you can fudge a number, or you can misreport a stock price, or you can do insider trading. I mean, come on. That's intellectualizing something that's really a gift that we get, which is we get to do the right thing when it's called for. I want you to understand that in my team, and in your class you do this, in my team, every time there's an ethic breach that's reported, it goes to everybody in the top team, and they have to write back to me, what did we learn from that? And partially it's because they do this in the airline industry. When a plane crashes, that plane that crashed in San Francisco, God love all those people, they have to study it, and every pilot has to do that approach as though they didn't set the airspeed right and they're in trouble, because they have to see if they can recover from it. In business, we do the same thing. And in a circular way, it's what I said to you a moment ago, we're practicing, because we're not holier than thou, and those people weren't dumb. How did they get in this spot? How did they get in the spot where they gave up the integrity of who they were? It's because they didn't practice it. So if you're in a company, when you go from here, and you go, I don't hear them talking about this, I want you to question why. Try and introduce softly ways that you can do it. And what you're asking them to do is, can we practice scenarios where we might be challenged? By law, most companies have to train you on this for global trade. This is the act that protects companies from getting into bribery and fraud. But you're really looking for a dialogue with the people you work with and saying, do we have a shared value about what we won't do? And the ethics have to kind of guide you in a really strong way. I hope that you trust me on that, because I've been through it all 360 degrees. I'll tell you a quick story. Is that okay?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes. Before you move to the story, would you mind playing that out just a little bit? When they write you back, your top management team, and you say, we had this problem with whether it's bribery or something else. Maybe just share with the group how that works in operation.
Well, and the way it works in operation is we put ourselves in the situation where we say, Roger Martin, who's the dean at Rotman, says, what would you have to believe for the people to get themselves in a situation where they rationalize it? So we're not allowed to make them devils, so to speak. So we make the assumption that human nature is good. What could they have possibly been thinking? So an answer will come, there was too much pressure on the goal. There was no literacy about the rules. There was a casualness that they didn't think they'd get caught. And I get a sum of responses like that. But they have to explain it like they're defending it, but they know it's wrong. But the story I want to share with you, we'll end with, is a real story at Steelcase. So you'd say, well, Jim, that's great. In 20 years, there's never been a scandal, but there almost was one. And it's quick, but I want you to hear me on this because it affected all of you in this room. And it was 9/11. On 9/11, the planes that crashed into various buildings crashed into furniture. And just think about that. And the one that crashed into the Pentagon, if you ever go back and look at pictures, you'll see that it penetrates the Pentagon, so there's a big hole where it goes in. So right and left, the windows are still intact. And the reason that is because the Pentagon had just gone through an upgrading of bomb-proof concrete and windows and glass to make them safer. I don't know that they had any foresight, of course, of this crisis, but they knew that the Pentagon built in World War II era was not up to the standards for an attack today. It incinerated all the furniture, which was all Steelcase. Now, what had happened 2 weeks before that was we had gone in there and replaced all the surfaces on the cubicles. Mike, you know what I'm going to tell you. And the surfaces of a cubicle is generally fabric. You can tack things in it, it improves the acoustics. And a cubicle panel goes like from here, down like this range. In that era, we had designed a second product that had great promise, which was a panel that goes all the way to the ceiling. We called that floor to ceiling. And the big idea that our people had, based on use, was that the fabric that goes on the cubicle could also go on the big wall, so that a customer could make a decision to only put this much wall up today, and 6 months from now say, I want it to go all the way up, and these surfaces would transfer back and forth. A year into this product, we sold $1 billion of it. We learned, though, that the fire codes here in South Bend, Indiana, are different for a wall that only goes this high versus one that goes all the way to the ceiling. I mean, they're dramatically different. So if you're me, which code would you pick? Would you pick the one that's the easiest to hit, meaning the one that burns faster, or would you pick the code that's the most safe? Now, for a moment, the arguments that ensued at Steelcase was, well, no one's burned, so we haven't had one complaint, but we found out this problem after we'd shipped $1 billion. So that was one argument I got. A second argument was, well, we just tell the customers that at your peril, you use the differences in your fire codes, which is part of the problem. The governing bodies that set fire codes can't make up their mind about this. And it's partially because of what I told you tonight, the dominant design of walls never imagined cubicles. Well, what we ended up doing was taking every surface back. We went out to all our customers and took them all back and put on the most stringent fire code material, regardless of whether they built the panel this high or this high. 2 weeks later, the plane incinerated the furniture in the Pentagon. So can you imagine how I felt that night going to bed if I had said, no one knows about this, no one will care, we took a $70, $80 million charge, executives got no bonus because of the charge, the board never asked us for any action, we had to go and tell them. But as one famous guy said, there's no softer pillow than a clear conscience. And I slept in that tragedy as best as I could because I knew what we had done is put around those people that got killed in the Pentagon the safest furniture standard in the world. Now you go, how do you know that? Because we tested all our competitors when we were rationalizing should we change it. Most of them didn't meet the standard at all. That was a tragic thing. I called all those CEOs and said, you got a year before I'm going public, because we can't be in a business where we don't adhere to the fire codes. And they all made excuses and stuff, but they all changed them. So I end with that story because I was that close. $70 million, I probably would lose my job. No one knows, no one's complained. But maybe it was my 8th grade teacher at St. Patrick's who was telling me, you know, that the right thing to do is this. So I offer that as exemplary, not behavior of myself, but of the kind of education you get. And you get an advantage versus others who aren't getting this, to have a professor like you do and someone who's taking you to these questions. Now you get to leverage that, and you're all going to be future leaders one day because of it. So thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you very much for inspirational words there, Jim. Our next Berges lecture is on the 18th back in Jordan, and it will start at 7:30 a week from Wednesday. Have a good evening, and thank you.